All right, you guys, this is our last lecture of the semester, and we are doing the road film. And to me, in a way, it wasn't what I planned to end on. It's not the lecture I thought we would have as the last lecture, but in a way, I don't mind it at all, because the road film for me is something quintessentially American. And why do I want to end on this very distinctly American film? I don't know why not. Because I think we've been having this play. We did French New Wave last week, and now we're going to have the American response to French New Wave, which we find at the end of the 60s with Bonnie and Clyde. And I just think it's a nice sort of bookend of this back and forth that we've gone this whole semester between America and Europe. So here we come back to America after the French New Wave, and you actually had Warren Beatty, who was producing Bonnie and Clyde, wanted Godard to do the film. Like, he actually did want, I mean, that's how influenced the filmmakers, the American filmmakers by the late 60s were, is they were looking at the French filmmakers and going, give me that guy. You know, that's the director I want. It didn't work out. He didn't end up using Godard, but he still produced the movie that ended the code. I mean, Bonnie and Clyde definitively is that when Hollywood pretty much goes, okay, that's it. You know, there's no more censorship, there's no more code. And the reason is because Bonnie and Clyde was completely independently produced, right? So it's Warren Beatty working outside of the system. It's the beginning of the, not only the auteur filmmaker, but the independent filmmaker. So you guys have heard of that phrase, you know, and it comes from this moment where you have somebody outside of the studio system, you know, who's able to come up with the financing to make whatever they want. And Warren Beatty made whatever he wanted, and the last scene is so incredibly violent by the standards of the day that pretty much, I mean, when they first released it, it wasn't a huge success, but it kind of grew and grew and grew in popularity. And so by the end of it, they were, you know, about a year into the release of Bonnie and Clyde, they're like, that's it, there's no more code. You know, if filmmakers can do this, if they can work outside the system, produce whatever they want, and then get a distribution deal, and people are going to show up and see these movies, well, there you have it. There's no more reason for the censorship. So that was the final death nail of the Hollywood censorship is here. But let's go back a little bit and talk about the road film and what exactly does it mean? Why do I want to look at the road film? Well, I think there's something quintessentially sort of, again, American about the idea of the road film. And why am I emphasizing American? It's our crazy love of driving, our crazy relationship with the road itself. And I heard this one theory one time, and I kind of liked it. It said that Americans, of course it wasn't an American that came up with this theory, but they pretty much said that Americans, it's not that they have a common genetic heritage, obviously we don't, but in a way we do. And this was the theory. The theory was that up until recently, what was it? Something like 95% of every human being born dies within 50 miles of where they were born. Meaning that human beings, by and large, don't move. You know, they're not moving around the planet. Or if they move around the planet, they come home. You know, there's some sort of call home that happens. So the argument is that there's only 5% of the global population that has what this person was calling the American gene, which is the idea that they're willing to pick up and leave and never come back. Know that they're going to die somewhere that they weren't born. That's the commonality between all the immigrants that came to America. Right, is that we were all, even though, you know, I came from, my, you know, grandparents came from Norway, your guys came from different places all over the world, the commonality with all of us is that we have immigrant parents, unless we have parents that were brought over here without their consent, and then from that position, all of us were willing to not go home. You know, our ancestors were. To hit the road and never ever look back. And what I liked about this theory was they called it the American gene because they likened it to a sort of ADD. That 5% of the world's population, this 5% that's willing to go and never come back, he said it's kind of like an ADD where they go, hey, check it out. What's over there on that hill? And they march over there to that hill and they go, this is awesome. Wait, look over there at that hill. Let's go over there. You know what I mean? And it tends to be sort of the American idea of this like type of restlessness. And if you go to our early history, we see it in Manifest Destiny, right? Push west, push west, push west, right? And then once we sort of established our boundaries, what's interesting with us now is we may not be trying to colonize, or we're not maybe not pushing the borders of our country in the way that we were. In fact, Americans don't leave America very often. But what we do more than any other country is we move around within America more than any other country. So you have this phenomenon where you have Americans, it's a very American thing to kind of couple up, maybe you're in college, you get together with your partner, and you're like, oh, okay, hey, what do you want to do? Oh, I got a job in Buffalo. Cool, let's move to Buffalo. And then the couple would pick up, move away from their family and friends, and go start a new life in Buffalo for 5 years, and then take a job somewhere else and then go and move there, right? This is kind of an American mentality, that your friends, your family, your network is not really that important. You know, that the couple unit can kind of pick up and go and move around, and it's sort of inconsequential. And then what? You have that nightmare scenario at the airport with Thanksgiving to try and get back home and do your family duty. Oh, so tonight you're like, I'm never going home for that. I mean, there's so many of us who are just like, nope, not with the Thanksgiving airports. How many of you guys will fly on Thanksgiving? Or around then? None of you, huh? Like, no, forget it. It's just not even worth it, pretty much. I won't even fly in December anymore, I think. I'm just like, I'm done. Like, Christmas and March sounds just fine if I want to see my family. But yeah, it gets a little bit nuts. But we do move away from our families, we move away from our hometowns, and then we keep on moving. This has been a little bit unique. And so what I'm trying to spell out here is that Americans have a romanticism with the road. You know, that we have this relationship to the road that maybe we don't find necessarily in all sorts of other civilizations. And so what exactly is that relationship? What would you guys say are kind of the ideas that we associate as Americans with the road?
Freedom.
Freedom, absolutely. Freedom. So why is it free? Why is the road free?
Just that temptation that you can pick up and go and just go about everywhere where the road goes.
Yeah, and again, this is this very sort of American idea, and actually where we hear it the most is living on Oahu, right? Hearing people move here from the mainland and just be like, oh, the hardest thing about being here is I just can't get in my car and drive. It's like something, I mean, there is something about growing up on the mainland, about being able to get in your car. Most of us, if we were raised on the mainland, have that experience of large parts of our childhood just being in a car, just driving for hours and hours and hours. Well, let me tell you, that doesn't happen if you're raised on Oahu. I remember the first time I took my daughter and she was in a car for more than an hour. We were on because she was raised on Oahu. You know, we went to the Big Island and we drove from one side of the island to the other. By the time we were on the top of Saddle Road, she'd had enough. She was like, what is this insanity? Why am I in the car more than 45 minutes? Get me out. Like, it was really interesting. And I realized, like, oh, she's never actually been on a road trip. You know, it was something I kind of took for granted, that this was a thing that was not happening in her childhood the way it did with me and my husband's. And I mean, isn't that very unique to Hawaii? Wouldn't that be kind of only kids raised in Hawaii would never go on a little road trip, sort of? And what would be the consequences for you psychologically if that was never something that you happened? Well, let me tell you, if you're my daughter, you can't tolerate being in a car for more than an hour. Forget it. Like, it just seems like inhuman torture to her. So maybe this on-the-road thing is mainland dependent. I'm not really sure. But I have it. I feel the freedom when I hit the road. You know, there's something in that mythology that works for me. And I would even go back to when we're looking at these films, and again, these films are made in the late 1960s. Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid is made in 1970, I believe. And really, we can kind of pin back, if we could say existentialism is the underpinning for French New Wave, we could say the beatniks are the underpinning for these movies, right? A book like On the Road, Jack Kerouac, is absolutely where these movies are drawing their inspiration from. So the beatniks in the mid-1950s were writing not just On the Road, Kerouac. I'm thinking about, who else am I thinking? Well, he wrote Tristessa too, which is actually a road book. Easy Rider was another movie that was made that had this blend of sort of beatnik values with roadiness, and really, what is that saying? What is that all about? You know, what is this road film idea? The other thing that we're gonna come back to that in a second, but the other thing I want us to look at with the road film is this, and I hinted at it at a few lectures, but this weird idea, and here comes the bad French, of le mort versus l'amour, right? Like this strange sort of combination of love and death, or sex and death. You know, and why, again, in our films, the two most heavily censored things are sex and violence, really. And what is this connection between sex and violence? And is there one? We could even question, is there one? But in French, there's even a phrase called le petit mort, which is not the little love, maybe if I'm saying it wrong, but it would be the little death. And that's in reference to orgasming. Right, so there's this, they even directly link sex and death, you know, by calling the orgasm the little death. It's not a very common saying, but they do. So let's go back to my clunky little circle and dot here, right? And let's just pretend, because some of what we've talked about, particularly in the second part of the class, is obsession, is emotional obsession, is daring the boundaries. You know what I mean? Like abjection, vertigo, all of these types of things. So what we're talking about here, again, with both sex and death, would be moving the subject from their center all the way to the borderlines. If outside the borderland of your subjective state is death, right, then sex would be, I would say, a bouncing back and forth over the line, right? Because really the containment of your subjectivity is the ability to verbalize, is the ability to put things within language. Because once you can put things into language, you can signify them, you can put them in part of the system of signification, right? So what's almost one of the defining characteristics of orgasm? You're like, that's a clumsy lead. You're able to verbalize at the same time, right? Hopefully the subjective experience of an orgasm is such that it obliterates your ability to do language, and that in its sense is death, right? If we've obliterated your way to make things symbolic, right, then that messes with your construction of self, and it's pulling you, again, way out of the boundary of that circle, and you're messing with the border. It's a little death. Your orgasm is great, but it's a little death at the same time. And what exactly is dying in that death? Let me lead you there. Do you remember with vertigo? We were talking about, again, we have visitors, maybe? Hi, welcome. Okay, so going back to vertigo, when we were talking about, you know, his obsession brings him, here, we'll do another fun circle. His obsession, there's his centered subjective state, and his obsession to Maddie brings him to the borderlands of his subjectivity. Okay? So, but again, what other things do that? So obsession with a woman does that, drugs does that, any type of obsession, right, is what pulls you to that borderland. Or having an orgasm is what I'm saying to you. This is the next phase of what I'm pitching to you, is that it's not just obsession, you can also just, stay regularly centered and then go have sex and reach that borderland place. So what's being accomplished there? Remember the death drive? Right, because the key is in le petit mort, right? If what I'm saying is that right with an orgasm you can get to the borderland and you can play with death, what's happening there, I would say, is in that lack of ability to verbalize, your subjectivity dies, right? What's dying in le petit mort is your own ability to subjectivize your experience. You're not in that much control when you're having an orgasm, right? Like, hopefully, you know what I mean? Like, it's hope, you know, that sort of is the defining moment of it, is that you're not totally able to control all of the markers of your physical being, and in that lack of control, and in that another one. Hi. In that lack of control, what happens then would be you're not able to articulate your subjective state exactly the way that you want. And that's the underside of the symbolic, right? That's the little death. Like, anytime you can't articulate yourself in exactly how you want to articulate yourself, there's something violent, or there's something that's a little bit murdery about it, just a little bit murdery about it, a little bit death drivey about it, in that it's, again, the death drive would be the underside of the symbolic, so it's threatening to pull the symbolic into the abyss where nothing is differentiated. You know, that's what the abjection does, that's what these states do. That's why they're appealing to us. Right? And that's the thing that we shouldn't forget. Most of our drives, most of our libido is about putting together, assembling, making things. We have a drive to get water, a sex drive to get sex. You know, most of our drives are to acquire something. But then there's the death drive, which is about dissembling things, you know, taking them apart. And we're attracted to that too. You know, we have some sort of attraction to that as well. And again, the road film is not different. Because the road film not only has plays with this idea of the relationship between sex and death, but it also plays with the idea of the road and death, or stepping outside the libidinal divide of what culture wants from you, which I think is what happens with the road. I mean, how many of you guys go into another country and just immediately stop obeying all of the traffic rules? Oh, it's just me. No, you do too. Yeah, I mean, I get wild, man. I remember when my daughter was 2. We went to Mexico and we were just like, oh, there's no car seat. Oh well, and we're like driving around Mexico in a VW van with my 2-year-old without not even in a car seat, and we were all, so there was like 4 adults. We were all fine with it. Because we're in Mexico. You know what I mean? But the thing is, if we'd just driven over the border to San Diego, it would have been immediately like, oh, why isn't she in a car seat? Oh my God. Like I would have freaked out. Same parent, different country, you know, different response to the laws, you know. And it is true that when I hit the road, when I go to another country, when I'm on a road trip, it's like stepping outside my normal moral system. And that's what's sort of great about it. So I'm going to go ahead and pull up the lecture notes here and we'll talk about it a little more in depth. As I mentioned, it's really Jack Kerouac's book On the Road that sort of sparks this, I would say, renewed interest in the road in Americana. Prior to that, we had sort of more like in film anyway, we had a 1930s version of On the Road, which was more like The Grapes of Wrath. It was the humility and dignity of the poor, and how the migrant workers have to take to the road. You know what I mean? It was more like that. It was more 1930s poor ideas about migration, migrant workers, and the Depression. It was more what we saw about images of the road prior to this re-romanticizing of the road that starts happening in the 1950s. So what again does the road represent? Well, it means escaping from our stifled lives. The one thing you know when you hit the road is you're not going to be in bed watching Netflix that night. You know what I mean? Like you're going to be, like something different is going to be happening. You're escaping the confines of your normal routine life. And this is a huge deal, especially to Americans. We're almost obsessed with it. Look at American Beauty, right? Like or The Graduate. Right? We always have these movies where suburbia is represented like some sort of a trap, a hell, you know, that needs to be escaped. That's certainly what we're going to see at the beginning of Bonnie and Clyde. Like it's certainly going to be where she is, even watch her face, her beautiful, perfect face. Oh my gosh, Faye Dunaway and Warren Beatty are like the 2 most beautiful people in the world when you watch this movie. And her face is framed. It's like the movie starts and she's, the framing of her face shows that she's jailed. You know, shows that she's jailed and she's dying to escape. She's dying to escape the situation, her stifled life. And it also represents liberation. So once you hit the road, whatever has been encasing you, it's gone, right? So there's a certain amount of liberation, there's a freedom. The road is also a place, again, past the libidinal divide of the law. So we do, I mean, it's almost what happens in Vegas stays in Vegas kind of an idea. You know, it's this idea that once you're away from your normal place of morality, maybe you don't have to obey your own morality. Do you know what I mean? Like, I do know couples like this. Like, oh yeah, I'm faithful as long as I'm in the country. You know what I mean? There's people that run their lives based on this. That there's one set of morality for them when they're at home, and if they go somewhere else, there's different rules. And even, like, not to that extent do I have that for myself, but oh my gosh, for years and years and years, I didn't smoke unless I was in Europe. You know what I mean? Like there was always like little ways where when I'm on the road, I would permit certain things that normally just are not permitted, even as little as junk food. You know what I mean? Like it could be something that small. But yes, we tend to be more permissive or opening of our values once we're past this imaginary libidinal divide. And then, there's the road film. There's all those who seek the road. There's a cop who lies in wait. Or there's eventual death. So there is a moralizing with the road film. Right? Like, it's not like, even though they broke the breed code, even though there's no more censorship, there is a normative narrative with this movie. Right? Like, we do reconstruct modern morality at the end in both films. So even though we're watching criminals and we're romanticizing criminals, they pay their price. So there is that normative ending. It's not quite as existential as the French would be. Yet I think there is this. The break is that we do like these criminals. Right? We do like them. It's the beginning of actually liking criminals. So even though they still need to be punished, they're definitely the heroes. They're definitely the protagonists of these movies. There's no doubt about it. Okay, so the road's ultimately a dead end, and it's less about destination and more about destiny with eventual death. Again, the lesson being, you step outside the libidinal divide. If you go too far, if you go way out, if you can play around with the line of the circle, right? But if you step outside the circle and you stay out there too long, you can't get back in. Right? And that's pretty much what it's saying. It's not that different with Thelma and Louise. It's not that different with Y Tu Mama Tambien. Do you know what I mean? There is always this type of fatalism with the road. Like you can try and hit it, but it'll. I don't know how it's going to work out for you. Well, according to Hollywood anyway. So the major conventions of the road movie are, do we need to do a thing with the camera?
Oh, no, I was going to move it at first, but you moved it.
Okay. All right, so the major conventions of the road movie, again, if I were to ask you what are the 5 tenets, what are conventions of the road movie, this is what they would be. One, the arduous journey. So there's always this sense that it's not just fun and games, there's something tough about these journeys that they're on. They either need money or there's some sort of, or they're being chased, something like that. It's not so easy. There's the sense of hope, right? So they leave for a reason, and they keep going for a reason. So it's kind of like they have a little bit of optimism. And then there's the bitter cup of reality when the seeker finds freedom, but then must face their nemesis, right? You never really get away. And that's the problem with the road movie is you don't really get away. You can run, but in the end you're going to face your nemesis. It's not really going to work out well. There tends to be a splashy death in these movies, and then it comes into the whole question of the ethics of violence. Right? So in both of these movies, Bonnie and Clyde and Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, watch how, particularly in the beginning of the movies, they try and be real cute with their violence. They're charming, like they try not to hurt people. It's the gentleman villain again, But this time they're not even the villain; they're the protagonists. They're the heroes. We're rooting for them, and they're good guys. That's really sort of the message of what these films are saying. So again, the genre, as I mentioned, it had shifted in the 1960s from movies like Grapes of Wrath, and it becomes a criminal as gentleman and folk hero. And doesn't that match with the times, right? It's the late 1960s. This is a culture that had watched the murder of JFK, the murder of Robert Kennedy, the murder of Malcolm X, the murder of MLK. We think that we live in crazy bad times. Can you imagine if all of the leaders were murdered? I think it's a little bit hard for us to even understand what that would be like in a certain kind of way. But they knew, the people who were making these movies were of that generation that had watched that. It was still going on. So I think there was this type of and they're being drafted, right? They're being drafted and told to go to Vietnam. So it's this thing where, is the law the good guy? And here, this next generation, the baby boomer generation of filmmakers starts going, no, the man is not the good guy. law is not right. The criminal is right. Because quite literally, outside of the movies, the criminal, the draft dodger, was morally right. You know, according to these guys, you could question it now, but according to these filmmakers in this generation, morally, they considered the criminals who were dodging the draft to be morally correct. Not the man that was drafting people and sending them to war in Vietnam. So don't we see sort of a parallel in the movies where all of a sudden the criminal is actually the good guy? You know, they're the one that we're rooting for, essentially. Okay, so women in these films are frequently detachable, an adjunct to the male couple. They also represent what I'm going to call part of the sex-death equation. The true love story with, like, the Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, or Y Tu Mamá También. You know, most of these movies really become buddy movies in the 1970s, because I think I've mentioned it before. In the 1970s, when you really have second wave feminism pushing, women disappear from cinema. Right? They just stop really showing women in films, and I think that the reason being is because they didn't know what to do with them. And in the same way we're seeing women disappear from movies right now, is anytime women start making a lot of noise in culture, Hollywood's like, we don't really know the safe way to deal with this, so we're going to make movies about men. And so in the 1970s, they just sort of had resorted to making buddy movies. You know, think about the Coppola film, The Conversation. That's two men talking, right? I mean, there was multiple movies like that. I mean, it was a very masculine era of filmmaking, while contrarily, in the world, it was very much women pushing against the power structure. So it was a little bit of an interesting sort of schism in that representation there. But prior to Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, and we will, in Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, see exactly how dispendable women are. I mean, like, they do not care about her at all. Not really, except in that she ties together the menage a trois, right? And we'll get to that in a second. Whereas in Bonnie and Clyde, she is important. You know, this is 1968, it's a little bit earlier. She is important. Faye Dunaway is important. So in both these movies, let's take some time to think about how sex is represented. Because I think these to me are the best movies. And they're one of the first movies that start talking about, oh my gosh, and Bonnie and Clyde, I don't even know that we're talking about this in movies today. In Bonnie and Clyde, Warren Beatty has an impotence problem, right? Like, he can't get it up. And they're talking about it in the movie, right? This is modern. You know, this is, again, code breaking. You know, that they would be showing, they wouldn't just be showing sex, they're showing failed sex. So we'll see him trying to become sexual with her, and he just can't. And it's very sexually frustrating for her. Like, she's very sexually frustrated. And he even says to her, look, man, I'm no lover man, but what I'm going to give you is this exciting life. And really, you'll see quite clearly that what he offers her instead of sex is violence. You know, like, he's like, basically at one point he's like, here's my gun. Right? I mean, it really is. He offers her a tangible gun instead of his penis, right? Like, it's that clear, and she chooses it. You know what I mean? Like, she's down for it. She's down for what Warren Beatty has to offer in terms of, okay, violence can be the stand-in for sex in this relationship, because I'm going to have this exciting good time and no harm, no foul. But then as things begin to go off the track, you know, she becomes a little more skeptical. You know, other people become involved. She's asked to put up with another female, and it just is kind of the beginning of the end. How many times is sex the beginning of the end? Isn't it in Romeo and Juliet, everything's kind of going fine until they have sex, you know, and then it's the beginning of the end. You know, and many times, and definitely in Bonnie and Clyde, when they finally manage to have sex, it's the beginning of the end. You know, so it's interesting how that happens, especially when you're dealing specifically with the tandem of sex and death, or sex and violence. So that's what we're going to see in Bonnie and Clyde. And then when we get to Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, we see something a little bit different, which is the real romance is between Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, right? And then there's another woman. It's interesting the way she's positioned structurally to be with both men, or to be between the men. And I could follow that lineage to the movie Bandits, where the female actually is sleeping with both the men, then right up to Y Tu Mamá También, where they all end up sleeping together. You know what I mean? Like, there's this type of weird dynamic that's going on, again, because we're beyond the libidinal divide of the road. Could it not be implied that they're together as a three-way couple? Let's watch and find out. We'll discuss as we go through the movie, because I think it's a little bit fun to look at how they've structured it. There's not censorship, but there's still the morality of the day. So we have to be careful with these insinuations that they could still be palatable to the mainstream audience. So is there any questions on any of that? Ready to watch the movie? This is a short lecture, huh? You're like, wow, we didn't know she could do that without tangents. Okay, let's watch the movies. You can stop that.